This next talk, guys, is super special, and I'm so excited to share this with you guys. So, Patricia Casey, she brought Josh Dugal with her boss, but these guys are special people, and we got to spend some time together, and they were actually in Arkansas for a conference before, and this is how I found out about all of this. But this is exciting. This is really, really good stuff. So Patricia Casey is a paramedic educator with many years of pre-hospital experience. She wouldn't tell me how many years because I think she doesn't want us to know how old she is. But she's dedicated to improving emergency care for pediatric patients with complex medical needs. And just hearing that right there alone for me as a paramedic, that scares me to death, right? I think about a kid with a trach or a G-bot, any kind of special needs kid. It's scaring me. I'm already worried because it's a pediatric patient, and it really adds on from that point on. So one of Trisha's biggest achievements, and something that's really moved me, is the design of this widely adopted STARS program that has been proven to improve outcomes for high-risk pediatric patients in the pre-hospital setting. Can't wait to hear this talk and for Tricia to share this with you guys. All right, give her a hand.
Everybody hear me okay? Got it. I'm a walker when I talk. I'm a classic paramedic. I can't stand right here still, so I'm going to walk around and use this mic a little bit. One thing clicker. Okay, that'll help. So yes, I'm a paramedic from the St. Louis area, and I have 20 years of experience in the pre-hospital field, so I'll own that. I have, I said 20 years in the pre-hospital setting in and around St. Louis. I'm also the mother of a special needs child, and I have the unique perspective of also being the daughter of my father. He was diagnosed with a late onset muscular dystrophy. So I had a trach vent patient in my home growing up. So this was part of life. I had a little bit of a different perspective going into the field. So then STARS was actually something that I developed 4 years ago as a lieutenant at the ambulance district I was at. And the intention at that time, and all I ever foresaw, was this program staying a small community program. But what we quickly discovered was that we had uncovered a solution to a very serious ongoing problem. Then STARS was picked up by Cardinal Glennon Children's Hospital, where I started working 3 years ago full-time, just to run this program, and now we've spread out throughout Missouri and Illinois and have over 600 children enrolled today. Is this mic okay with you guys, or would you prefer me to be on that one? Okay, all right, moving along. Oh, and I also work on the ambulance in the city still just to keep current with skills. So we have to have the disclaimers slide. I have no financial disclosures. We lose money on STARS. I'm not selling anything. I sound like a car salesman up here. Trust me, no one profits off of this program. But I'm coming to you from Cardinal Glennon Children's Hospital in St. Louis. We are a 195-bed, level 1 trauma center. We often call ourselves the other children's hospital because everybody thinks we're St. Louis Children's. We're not. We're just 3 miles from them, but we both stay busy. We are a charity hospital. We're a nonprofit, which we're actually very proud of. We're often dubbed the hospital with a heart because there are no patients we turn away. So I think that a lot of you probably know the why, but I'm going to try to put a little bit more depth into the why. I think we know that when you're dealing with pediatric patients with complex medical needs, the fear factor escalates a little bit. I think a lot of that we can attribute to the fact that in the emergency services world, we love those algorithms. We work off of recipes, right? If you see ABC, you treat with 1, 2, 3. Unfortunately, this population usually doesn't fit those. So we have a group of kids that are going to cause us to deviate from what we typically learned. And unfortunately for us, for them, they're twice as likely to experience that out-of-hospital medical emergency than the healthy child. But while that's true, we're not spending enough time learning about how to manage it. Think about your typical PALS program. You talk a lot about cardiac arrest. We do a lot more trauma with ours at Cardinal Glennon. The likelihood of that healthy child just having a spontaneous arrest is very, very slim. These accidents are occurring, and they're occurring all over our nation. Unfortunately, a lot of them are then swept under the rug. We don't talk about them afterwards like we do when a typical child dies from a medical error. We're all suffering the consequences. The kids are suffering the consequences. Number one, the families are devastated. And I think that those care providers who find out after the fact that they maybe could have fixed this with a very simple solution, but they just didn't have the tools, I don't want to be that paramedic. I don't want to live with that for the rest of my career. That's my friend Cannon. We just recently did a photo shoot with him with St. Louis City EMS. He's one of our stars. And my partner took that picture. I didn't know it. I love that picture though. He was actually refusing to smile for us and thought he was gonna cry, so I picked him up and gave him a little pep talk. And I'm like, hey Cannon, we gotta show the world that you matter, that your life matters. He's obviously one of our trach patients, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about that population because that's where we actually see the preventable deaths the most. Pictures speak 1,000 words, right? So this is a component of STARS that's extremely important. When I designed this, I wanted to get the medics face-to-face with the kids. I wanted them interacting with the kids. And when I designed it that way, my intentions were to take the fear factor away from the children. I didn't want any child to be fearful of men and women in uniform. What I quickly learned, and what still holds true today, is that I have yet to find a child who's at all scared of EMS, or firefighters, or police officers. They love that. These kids see the lights and the sirens and the trucks, and they're so excited. And it's the opposite. I have the medics a little timid. They don't want to touch these kids. They don't want to move these kids. They don't want to break them. And we just say, they won't break. It's okay. You can touch them. You can hug them. You can play with them. So do I have a pointer here? Yeah, he'll break, but we'll let you know which ones will. It's all good. So, just learning how they communicate and understanding that baseline. When I give my actual special needs, oh Lord. What do I do here? Am I going backwards? This is inevitable when I have a pointer, guys. Okay, so, knowing, when I give my special needs lecture, a medical lecture, then I focus a lot on the importance of understanding what baseline is for every patient, because something I say a lot is that if you don't understand what typical is or what normal is, it is impossible to assess for the abnormal, because my kids there's no typical going on here. So letting them just understand giving them that firm understanding of what's typical so they know when the child has deviated from that is imperative. So I'm going to let you watch just a little bit of STARS in action. I broke up our promo video into several little clips for you guys. Oh, we don't have sound.
The STARS program focuses on what we call special needs patients. These are patients that have medical needs beyond what you see generally in the general pediatric population. These can be kids with tracheostomy, breathing tubes, feeding tubes, complex medical problems, multiple different complex medical problems.
Suction tray if needed, engagement dependent.
STARS is an acronym for Special Needs Tracking and Awareness Response System. I've been a paramedic for a long time. These kids were challenging. We train typically on healthy children. Those are not the children who are likely to have a medical emergency.
So I just wanted to let you see how the dispatch portion works for that. So each of our kids, a really important part of our program is for EMS to have that pre-alert so they know prior to arriving on scene what they're walking into. And hopefully that's a child they know a little bit about already if they're running in their own district. So yes, absolutely these kids are at risk. It's a proven fact that children with complex medical needs are the fastest growing subset of patients in the United States. We are saving kids like crazy. They are surviving, but not all of them are thriving. And we are sending them home to EMS providers and community hospitals who are absolutely not prepared to take care of them. We're sending them home with equipment that no one's familiar with. We're sending them home with equipment and syndromes that our own pediatric emergency physicians aren't necessarily comfortable with. We see struggle even there with these kids. There is definitely a breakdown in communication. We then are still telling these caregivers, we're training them, we're teaching them a whole lot, and then we're saying, but if you have an emergency, don't panic, just call 911. There's a problem there, right? We've left some pretty important people out of that equation. The people who are supposed to be the heroes that are supposed to be able to fix anything, we're not training them, we're not preparing them at all. So have we failed them? I'm gonna say yes. And my medical director is very comfortable now with saying yes. We don't mince words. When we talk to our PICU and our NICU, we're saying, hey, not a good idea. You're not sending this kid home to a safe environment. You're setting this child up for failure. We're seeing more and more NICU to home discharges. That drives me crazy. We're sending these kids home from the very highest level care possible within our hospital to a whole lot of sometimes no care other than just parents, because what we're also seeing is a decrease in our availability of home health providers to get home nursing into these homes for these kids. So I like this little timeline. This is St. Louis City Star 22, otherwise known as Lavender. She's kind of a superstar. She has her own social media page with like 3,000 followers. So Lavender's mom happens to be a costume designer. So when Lavender's in-house, she always has a different theme for the day. She's a mermaid sometimes, she's all kinds of things. But this day she was Snow White. So they wanted to take a picture of Snow White with her 7 dwarves, aka TCU nurses, RTs. There's probably a fellow in there, I'm not sure. But what I saw when this picture was posted was not the cute Snow White scenario. What I saw was the fact that if Lavender does one of her little seizure episodes, she decides to buck her vent a little bit and desat, then at the push of a button, or not even the push of the button, because she's being watched in the monitors too, at the nurse's station, that's gonna flood in to fix what's going on immediately. And when Lavender comes to our hospital, even if it's just a pre-op thing and she's doing fine, she will not be admitted on any care level less than TCU, because she needs, we feel, this type of support to keep her safe. So she passed her car seat test to go home, and nothing changed from that picture with that staff to where she passed her car seat test. She just plateaued. She was doing okay, so it was time to go home. We said, see ya. And she was one of those kids that went home to parents who work and not full-time nursing assigned. We couldn't get full-time nursing for her for I think the first 2 weeks she was home. So why is it okay for her to require this level of support in our hospital, but then we send her home to just mom and dad. I don't think that's okay. The American Thoracic Society very clearly states that children on home ventilation should have wakeful eyes on them 24/7, which we know is impossible when we don't have 24/7 nursing assigned for these kids. So where do the pitfalls lie when we're taking care of this population? There's a lot of them, and there's more than on this list, but this is what we've identified as big ones. There is the possibility that these kids are sometimes limited to the closest facility, which is not always the closest, it's not always the appropriate facility for these kids. But when we have programs like STARS in place, there's things we can do. I don't believe that there's any area in medicine that should be black and white. So if this kid truly is safest at their tertiary center, and we believe we can get them there safely with training and education and just a little bit more knowledge and preparation, then we will make that happen. Misinterpretation of assessment findings goes back to that misunderstanding of baseline that can occur, and this can happen both ways. I have my friend Carly right now who has such terrible tracheomalacia that she at 6 months was at a PEEP of 15. This kid is a terrible looking breather. She's really happy, but she breathes like this all the time. We were dancing to Baby Shark last week, and she was dancing and breathing like this, and that's just her normal. Now, if you were to walk in the room and see that, you'd say, oh, wow, no, I'm not driving any more than 5 minutes with you, because you don't realize that's okay. And then I also have the little boy with muscular dystrophy who died last month in the back of an ambulance because these kids don't show respiratory distress. And these medics didn't know to have this kid on N-Tidal. And these kids don't have the ability to show you they're in respiratory distress. And all of my hyperventilators are going to fool you because they're going to sat just fine. It's scary, and they do it fast, and they crash fast. We also teach, whenever I see any special needs lecture or read a chapter in a text about special needs, it's that rely on caregivers, rely on caregivers. Absolutely, and I want to be careful with this statement because your primary caregivers are gold. Keep them at the bedside. You need them there. Do not ignore them. If mom says something's not right, you better believe something's not right. But we cannot rely on them 100% because if they call 911, they're asking for help. So we have to be prepared to at least give some sort of assistance. What we see a lot, especially for our end-of-life kids, which we're seeing more and more, is a complete lack of field-appropriate advanced directives. I'm not familiar with what you all have here in your state, but in Missouri, we don't have the PULST form. We just have that purple out-of-hospital DNR, which, if you want to get technical with, isn't even written for under 18 population. And then we have the specialty letters. Our clinics love to send home kids with special instructions that this is what they think EMS should do. But our specialty clinics don't have any idea what your capabilities and limitations are, which is a problem. They have no idea you have a physician medical director that you have to work under. They're like, protocols? What? What do you mean? This is what I want them to do. They need to do what I want them to do. The worst offender is neurology. Oh, I go head-to-head with neurology all the time. 3 years I've been working with these people, and they'll still send home a letter and get upset that their kid wasn't given Keppra en route. Okay, for the 1800th time, EMS doesn't have Keppra, so maybe we can do something about that someday, but specialty letters, we need to let everybody know we need to do a little bit more with those. A lot of our kids who have those emergency medications, like emergency steroids or clotting factors, that's not necessarily going to be given if it's not recognized and there's not education behind that. And then, of course, there's always response times. I do a lot of eye-opening. We see a discharge that we think is kind of iffy. And I'll say, okay, I want you guys to know where this kid is going. You're you're looking at about a half an hour before you get first responders on a good day. And that might not even be an ALS crew. And then the hospital's like, oh, that's just things they don't think about. So back to the home hospice palliative care. When we work with these kids, we always say it's essential in STARS to have that closed loop communication. If you're missing one link, then this whole plan can fail. Everybody has to be on the same page. And that's especially true when we're talking about our end-of-life kids, because it's extremely rare for our kids to have a straightforward DNR. They usually have modifications. So there's some things that parents have decided they don't want, some things they decide they do want, and then we also need to let everybody know that mom and dad can freak out at the last minute and rescind the whole thing. I'm going to stop doing this on accident. So, and it's really important to involve the medical directors, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but I've really done a lot of eye-opening within our teams in the hospital of what physician medical direction is. So this is a good example of our St. Louis City medical director, Dr. Gilmore, helped us out with our palliative care team. They emailed me because they had a little boy, he was 13, going home. He's one of our oncology patients, and they did not expect him to live through the weekend. Mom and dad weren't comfortable signing that purple form, and we see that a lot. I will sit and talk to them. We will tell them over and over, you can rescind this at any time, but it's against their very nature as a parent to sign that DNR, to say, don't save my kid. So these parents were also, they were English was not their native language. They were not comfortable signing that. And the palliative care team emailed me with a list of questions. Will EMS do this? Will they not do this? Can we ask them to not do this? And I said, I can answer 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 5. That's completely up to their medical direction. So he agreed to actually have a phone call with them. And while we didn't make him a star because we knew that he wasn't going to make it through the weekend, we had this letter and written with numbers to be able to call his oncology team and take direction from them and help out mom and dad if they needed help during that time. And I was very impressed because I honestly didn't know this letter had been drafted, and I got on the ambulance that night, and this was something that you actually sign for on sign-off. So everybody knew you signed narcotics and you signed this letter that you knew this little boy was in the district and this might happen this weekend. This is actually Helen's plan. It wasn't the plan for, I should have clarified that. That was an example of a letter. This is a totally different kid over here, but who also has a DNR. So in our database, if a child has a DNR or they're a part of our complex medical care program, which Helen is both, you'll see in red up there. So you know if those are there, that his IHP, his individual health plan for the hospital, is in there as an attachment. And then also you will have signed DNR paperwork as well as an attachment to you. So this is Kellen. He's an extremely complex little boy. He's a great model for training, and his mother loves us to use him for training because she says, you know what, this really truly gives Kellen's life meaning. If he can help another child get better treatment, then we're just so excited about that. So we use Kellen Wise. You can see he's vent trach dependent. He has lysencephaly. He seizes several times a day. So when you have him in a training, he's very likely to have atypical seizures, which you can point out. He's on the ketogenic diet, so you have to be very careful with blood sugar management, and he has a VNS also to stop seizures. So we can do a lot with him. And then he has one of those modified pulse plans for his DNR. Mom is very realistic, and she knows that Kellen's prognosis is not good. But she wants all supportive care done. What she told me is, Trish, I want everything until hands go on his chest for compressions, and I want everything to stop. And I said, you know what, we can write it that way. And we can make sure everybody's in agreement that that's how it's going to go. So this is Kellen. He does vocalize and wake up a little bit and track, but he refused to wake up for this video. But his mom really, I like the way she explains how it feels to be a special needs mom.
Every day, everything was sort of on us to educate. We would go to like local, our local ambulance, or we had to proactively do things like that. Say, hey, wait, we want to make you aware of our situations.
What STARS did is helped kind of remove that burden. It means that I can actually call 911 and potentially be his mom. Because if I'm calling 911, that means I know I can't get into Cardinal Glen in enough time, and I am scared to death for my son. And that's the scariest part.
His care requires a lot of different people. You have to work with medical professionals, you got to work with family. It really does take a village.
STARS speaks their language where, as much as we do know, we're still parents. We do not have a medical background. I have a medical background with Kellen.
So the very first time I ever talked to Jamie and explained what I did, she said, oh, thank you, because that's the one thing she pointed out. She said, I know a whole lot about Kellen. I feel like usually I'm an expert in Kellen, but the one time I called an ambulance, I was so scared, and they completely turned to me. She goes, she said, there's this, that. I wanted to be listened to, obviously, but I called for help. So, I think that I said, I understand, and we're going to do our best. We can't make everybody experts in every kid. That's never going to happen, but we can try to fix the situation the best we can. And that's just so important for her. Like she said, I just want to be mom. Sometimes I just want to be mom. So field deficits exist in many areas, and we pointed out some, but the one thing that really concerns us that we really hound on and nail on constantly is emergency tracheostomy care, because like I said, this is where we actually see neurological devastation and death the most. So when I started Cardinal Glen, I wanted to know who the sickest of the sick were. So I traveled through the NICU, introduced myself, the PICU, and RT, and when I identified myself as a paramedic, not everybody was so welcoming. Not everybody loved me, especially the RTs and the RNs in the NICU and PICU who had worked really hard to save these kids who suffered loss of life from a decannulation or a plug. Very fixable issues. And one of the things that one of the RTs who I'm now very close to, but she's one abrasive woman, she said to me, oh, you're a paramedic, huh? And I said, yeah. She's like, I thought, aren't you supposed to be an airway expert? What's wrong? Why can't you fix a simple trach? And I was like, I can. And I started thinking about it, and I'm like, gosh, you know what? 20 years ago, did I learn emergency trach care? Or did I learn that from having a dad who had a trach and working as a tech for 2 years in the burn unit in med-surg ICU where everybody was trached? And then, I was that medic. If I showed up on scene and had a trach patient, I was like, oh, phew, I don't have to intubate you. You can do whatever you want now. So I have an airway that a surgeon made for me that I'm very comfortable with. So we started polling medics, because I'm like, honestly, I can't remember if I had trach training in medic school. And what we came up with is that 62% said no. So 2 years later, we did a national survey with Dr. Peter Antevi hosted a webinar with us on it, and I'm like, hey, I want to do a survey if you don't mind. And this is what came back with mixed providers, physician level through RN and medics. Is it 60% saying no? Seems to be that everybody's very comfortable with suctioning and oxygen delivery, but when it comes to an emergency trach change that is going to occur more frequently in my population, there's no comfort at all. There's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of very scary misinformation out there. So we went crazy with trach training. We've trained thousands of providers since then, and a trach patient gets into STARS no matter what. That's an automatic in. We try, if that community, if that ambulance district has not had our training one-on-one, we get in there and we try our best to get in there prior to discharge. And we try to get the kids in there We do a lot of trach changes at the firehouse or at home. We have them go watch routine trach changes and have them get as comfortable as we can with that procedure. So I did a poster for the AAP last year, and this was the graph actually we had on the poster for trach deaths and outcomes for 911 calls. So this was difficult. It's very difficult to grab data for STARS because unfortunately, no one's tracking these kids. You would not believe how difficult it was to get that increase in number of trach patients from 2017 to 2018. There's fields missing in the EPIC system that don't allow you to accurately pull this type of data. But we do have those clinic nurses who still keep those spreadsheets, and it drives some people in the hospital crazy, but those spreadsheets can be gold. So I was able to take the list of trach patients from 2009 to 2018 and just go through every single one, every single ED visit and 911 call to see which ones were respiratory distress, and I pulled those and we looked at outcomes. So what you also see here is a dramatic incline of calls being made for these kids. But we were able to show that with our, that initiative to go out and just blast trach training, that we were able to cut off the deaths. So the deaths that you see here in 2014, those were plugs and decannulations purely. And then the injury, where you see injury in blue, that's actual permanent neurological devastation. These are kids who are neurologically intact, who are going to be decannulated, who had a really good prognosis, who are now kids who just seize 24/7, will never eat by mouth, will never see, will never hear, will never interact with their environment due to an issue that could have been corrected. So we talked a lot about STARS and types of kids, but not exactly what the program does. So one thing we do is which is a little bit unique, is that every child has their own number. We don't simply flag addresses because our kids travel. And quite often these emergencies happen outside of the home environment where they're in a little bit of an unstable transition period, or at school, at the store. So we want their information to be accessed and not tied to an address. So they have their own number. These are the St. Louis City STARS. So when you pull up the database under your district, you default to your kids, but then you can search kids, any child that's registered in the system whatsoever. We're a very training intensive program. There is no emergency paperwork or form out there that can fix this issue. The training has to be in place. Our plans are also designed for EMS and ED use. We take into consideration capabilities and limitations, and we write the plans for that. And the big key here is getting that information in their hands before the emergency. I've argued this several times as a paramedic. I work at the state as the chair for the pediatric subcommittee, and I do a lot of arguing from a medic's point of view. And one of the things that I will stand very firmly behind is that arriving on scene to a high acuity emergency is not the time to be handed a piece of paper and try to interpret that when you're supposed to act, because we know seconds count. I even had a nurse say, well, can't you have someone read it to you? No, it doesn't work that way. So that's another reason why we want that information there prior to. So here's, I'm gonna let Andrew tell you a little bit about his experience with STARS.
Some of those calls that are more serious in general can be hectic as it is, so then you add a specialty need or specialty skill or specialty device on top of that, and that just adds to your panic.
Riley was born at 23 weeks and 4 days. She has chronic lung disease, hence why she has her trach. I've seen her blue 1,001 times, but there's something different from being in a hospital when you have that code blue button than being home. When I put the monitor on her, I think her stats were about 60 going down like fast. She was dropping pretty fast. And at that point, I'm like, okay, we're gonna go ahead and call the ambulance.
That call popped up, and then popped up STARS. So right away, the STARS notes, every bit of information that we were needing for that call was on there. Before we even got on the call, I knew parents' names, child's name, to conditions, what bag, everything was right there. We walked in confident, we walked in knowing what we were doing, and we went right basic, following the steps. The sheets are broke down so nice and easy for you that we literally just followed exactly how it went, and it just started to work out.
Whenever they got there, it was like a relief, like, okay, well, I'm already freaked out enough. I'm just glad that they know Riley. They know she has a trach, a G-tube. They know what to suction her to, what kind of trach she has. It was nice to know that they were taking her into the ambulance, and we were waiting out there like, okay, they got it. They got this. They know Riley.
So when we create these plans, there's a process that goes through as a chain that always occurs. So we get the referral to my team, which right now is me, my medical director, and one other person. Finally, we're excited. But the referral comes from multiple places. I hear that all the time. Where do you find your kids? How do you find out about these kids? We're very fortunate to have a lot of buy-in and support from all of the clinics within our hospital because they really have seen the results for their kids. So we get referrals from cardiology, from the NICU, from our palliative care team, neurology, home, ENT, you name it, we get them. And then we also have a lot of community awareness. So we'll occasionally have pediatricians from children who aren't in our hospital because we have kids that don't belong to us. We have kids from the other 2 pediatric hospitals in our area as well who will refer to us with high-risk kids, and then parents will occasionally call and ask if their kid qualifies. I write the draft, which often surprises people, or my partner does, but we write those for the field and taking into consideration the capabilities of that ambulance district, distance, you name it, there's a lot that goes into that. Goes back to the specialist for review. They are the ones who often have questions. Well, why do we do it this way? I'm like, oh, okay, wow. And it's really eye-opening for them. It's been really fun to see. And then where this goes, which is a key that's missing from most other programs similar to ours, is that then that goes to the EMS medical director. No plan goes live for a paramedic to view until the EMS physician medical director hits an approve button. That way when we teach and we're out and about, we can say, you don't need to waste time pulling medical direction. If you have orders here, you give them, it's been pre-approved. And the EMS medical directors appreciate not only having that opportunity, but knowing what challenges their paramedics could potentially face in their areas so they can model trainings and et cetera to match those. And then that plan goes live and of course the training that's involved. There is no easy button. Like I stated before, there is no simple form that's gonna fix this problem. And I get asked that all the time, like, wow, that's a lot. I'm like, well, that's what it takes. Because we've seen programs start and we've seen programs fail. And we know that it's going to take a lot of work to fix it. So it's got to be that identifying who those kids are who are at high risk, providing that education, and then preparing. This is my friend Nathan. He's passed away, unfortunately, since this photo was taken, but he's one that we identified was really far from even getting BLS first responders. So we set him up with a flight plan as well, which we do quite often for our kids in rural communities. And some of them will actually do scene flights. Communication is key. Everybody who has a chance to be with these kids during an emergency has got to be included in this planning. 911 dispatchers, of course, but everybody you see on this list plays a very important part in the chain of survival for these kids during an emergency. This particular training is from a child in a rural area, and we have so much buy-in from our program. I was so proud to say we had 2 competing air ambulance services there to learn about this kid. We had the community hospital, our EMSC reps from Illinois and Missouri came to watch our training, And we also had the CNO from the hospital there as well, all for one kid that was going home with a vent from the NICU. We are a true system. We're not just an emergency plan. We can't be. We spread a lot of awareness. We do webinars now, which are becoming more and more popular. We hold quarterly meetings in our region where we have a coordinator from each district, if we're lucky, who helps coordinate trainings for their kids. And a lot of our ambulance districts do a lot of cool PR stuff with their kids throughout the year too, just to build that relationship and understand that baseline. We have representation at the state level. I sit on our board on the state and advocate for my kids. We are teaching in most of the paramedic programs in our area as well, just to raise that awareness and make sure they have that emergency training and can recognize atypical seizures, for example, before they ever hit the field. And then we hit a lot of training symposiums as well and do a lot of speaking events, again, just to raise awareness. We made our trach poster this year. Candy, who's our model, inspired that because she's one who was at, unfortunately, we're embarrassed to say, one of our system hospitals over in Illinois, and she had a pediatrician who did not understand trachs at all. He had a lot of misinformation, and it was scary. And her ENT called me in a very aggressive manner and was upset about this. It was my fault somehow. But we had difficulty getting in there to do that education. And I'm like, you know what? We have trauma posters. We have stuff all over the place. We need to make a trach poster. Our kids are actually dying. Andy did okay, thank goodness. But so we made a very simple trach poster just with step-by-step tips and information and very valuable information. We want it to be from the kids' perspective. That poster, actually, we have them here. They're free. If you want to take them back to your ambulance district, your hospital, your school, I heard I have some school nurses in here. We work very closely with Special School District in St. Louis, and they have these in all of their rooms as well. So please, please take our posters. That's why we made them. So they're here to take. I get asked about who fits in your program, and that's very difficult to define because these kids might qualify just because of where they live, or certain risk factors that we've identified. They might not qualify for St. Louis City because they're so close to our hospital and they have a different level of care providers available. Like I said, trach kids and home bed kids get in, hands down. Cardiac history, actually, while they're mid-repair, especially those kids who have those baseline SATs in the 70s and 80s that people just think are so scary, we get them into STARS. If they don't deviate from PALS guidelines after they're repaired, surprisingly, they can have a really scary looking history and not really be at too high of risk, so they don't always get in. We cannot take every child with epilepsy. My own child has an atypical form of epilepsy, but those that are controlled, we don't necessarily need in STARS. So what we want are those ones that are really status epilepticus prone, or who have atypical presentations that get missed. We see that a lot. We get a lot of kids coming into our hospital in status that people they just don't recognize because it's not what they're taught to recognize as a seizure. We have our mitochondrial kids and our rare metabolic kids that even our doctors aren't comfortable with in the ED that get in. And then those that have those emergency medications, we want them in as well. This is my friend Alec. He's one of my most complex kids. I actually follow Alec when he travels. I call ahead and make sure that the EMS district knows that he's coming, because while he looks really great here, he's a superhero in real life, because this kid's one of our osteosarcoma patients who also has an LVAD, and he terrifies people. He wears his LVAD in a backpack, so that's what he's wearing here. I made him a really ugly orange tag for his backpack that says that this is an LVAD, a medical device, and he won't wear it because he's a teenager. And I always say, I want people to know that he's not a regular kid, and he and his mom say, but he just wants to be a regular kid so bad. I'm like, well, I get it, but he scares me. So yeah, we follow Alec. He also likes to bleed out, and we have to keep him really, really thin. He's heparinized because of the LVAD, and he also has an anaphylactic reaction to platelets. So he's just a mess. So we send him with his form everywhere he goes, and even large pediatric hospitals are very appreciative of it if he ends up there. So we tried to identify those risk factors, and it's something we still work in progress, but what I'm doing is looking at all the deaths every year that come into our hospital and pulling out any kid with complex medical needs, and I'm trying to find that common denominator between them. What is really going on? These kids who are dying, why? And something that actually kind of, it's really standing out is that I don't have a death, an unexpected out-of-hospital death, where there was a home health nurse in the home. So I'm hoping I can use that information for ammunition someday, because we're seeing less and less hours approved for our kids. Because as we know, health insurance dictates how we treat our kids, unfortunately. We do have issues with inexperienced home health. Unfortunately, it's very, very rare, almost never, that you get a nurse assigned to our kids in the home who have any type of experience whatsoever with taking care of kids with vents or trachs. We do a lot of trach training with them ourselves. I have to make sure parents know they're not trained, because parents often assume that because they have a nurse assigned to them, that they can deal with the emergency, and they learn the hard way. When it is time to do that emergency trach training, the nurse goes, whoa, no, I didn't learn this. So, home environment, we see a lot of issues, socioeconomic issues that play into what type of resources parents have and how many parents are home. And then, of course, distance to hospitals. We do have a death in school, lack of trach training, perfect storm for this kid. She didn't have her one-on-one nurse there. The school nurse wasn't trained, and she was able to ambulate with shortness of breath from the playground into the nurse's office, where she continued to decline and plugged. And we had trained EMS, and they were ready, but the CPR was already in progress, and unfortunately that was one of those ROSC situations where she was deemed completely brain dead 2 days later and was taken off of support. So what we've learned requires a dedicated team, and a very dedicated team. We do STARS 24/7. It's not something that anyone in your hospital can really do part-time. You have to have someone dedicated. Updates are imperative, and I'm not going to lie, it's sometimes hard to keep up with them. We have a system where I check every morning to see who's admitted, and I make sure I do an update at discharge. The majority of my kids are in our complex medical care program, so when they come in for their visits every 3 months, I also get an update from that clinic, so I can update plans as well. You've got to set qualifications. We started out big and didn't realize how big we would get. So we have a lot of kids still that we're trying to graduate who don't necessarily need to be in the program. We want the truly at-risk sickest of the sick, so we can focus on making sure they have the best plan possible. Continuous training is a must, especially in agencies that have high turnover rates, like St. Louis City. No one wants to work for the city, it's a horrible place. So they have no retention whatsoever. I don't know why I stay there. But we at least got to where we have this training and information in onboarding. So when they come through their new employee orientation, they learn about STARS, they learn about their sickest kids. Metrics are a must. We're constantly trying to get grant funding because we don't charge for STARS. It's a money pit. So everybody wants to know numbers. They want to know your successes. You say you've done this, you have these anecdotal stories, but prove to me that you work. So had we had the database to start with, I would have had a much easier time. I don't know if you noticed in that first video, I had the medics pulling out a binder. We started out on paper. That's a nightmare. We're still trying to pull that back and get all of these kids into our database using our app, because that way we can ensure that everybody's looking at the same plan. We don't have version control issues. We can control it, and then we know when these emergencies are going out because of the click of a button that says if you're accessing that plan for an emergency or not, and then I can look back and track outcomes. So I'm going to close here with some closing comments from Andrew and my medical director.
Truly is an important program, and I truly feel that as the training officer here, we will make sure that we have this program every year, that we need to have a refresher updates and stuff like that. But if anybody does not have that has STARS patients in their community, they're missing the boat here.
Each time you have a positive impact between that provider and that family and that patient, and care is provided that you know wouldn't have been provided without this kind of training and education. I don't think you can really put a number on that. How big of an impact is that when you can say, hey, these kids would have died had you didn't have this kind of training? I think that's kind of what I can say.
And I'm happy to say that Riley is decannulated and walking, and we consider her one of our success stories, of course. So 23-weeker who's now living a pretty darn normal life is something to be proud of. One kid counts, we hashtag that, that's our tagline. One kid counts comes from one of those state level arguments where I had a nurse from another pediatric hospital say, wow, you talk about trach this and trach that and STARS, and don't you think it's a little bit overkill? We've only had one death. And I said, wow, do you want to listen to what you just said? I challenge you to go in front of those parents and say, you only lost one, because I don't think that's going to go over very well. And in St. Louis, at our hospital, one kid counts. And that's where that just stuck. So that's our motto, that's our mantra. Every single one matters. This is Sean. He's another one of our success stories that could have been a statistic on one of my graphs. He was a decannulation. He had an amazing mom who's very well trained, who panicked, and these emergencies aren't a one-person job, and she was alone. EMS got on scene. They were able to recognize a decannulation. They had a difficult recannulation and said, hey, grab me your smaller size. They knew mom had that smaller size emergency tray. They got it in. They transported him because they were afraid that he had aspirated through this, and we sent him home 4 hours later. And this was a week post that event. And he's also spending his days off the vent now and has a prognosis that's very good, and he will hopefully be decannulated soon as well. You can also follow us on social media. We have our Facebook page is STARS for Special Needs Pediatric Patients, and we have an Instagram, STARS@EMS, and we do a lot of training tips and stories about our kids that are inspiring, and a lot of awareness just in general as well. So that's my team, and thank you very much for having me here. I appreciate it.